Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, the pre-sales edition of the 33 CXOs. Today, we welcome Seong Park. Seong is the Senior Vice President of Field Engineering and Customer Success at ThoughtSpot, and he entered the world of pre-sales at BladeLogic, having previously been a database administrator. Despite no prior exposure to sales engineering, he took to the playbook expertly and quickly established himself as a senior leader, going on to take high-profile roles at both BMC and MongoDB. In this episode, we discover what makes Seong the perfect partner to CROs as they establish go-to-market strategy and rapidly scale the business. This is his playbook.
In the pre-sales edition of the 33 CXOs, we discover the crucial role that the pre-sales organization played in what is regarded as the greatest success story in the history of software sales. When John McMahon reunited the team at BladeLogic, he had a clear vision to create a sales and pre-sales organization that was in absolute unison. The symbiotic and almost telepathic sales rhythm is the benchmark for best practice. The outcome is not only execution excellence, but a shift to a value mindset which transcends any shift in technology. The pre-sales team now take executive positions at some of the fastest, most disruptive technology companies in the world. What we discover is that John McMahon's vision has not only changed how we sell, it's changed what we sell. Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Patrick Harrison.
It's great to be here.
And it's an absolute pleasure and honor to be joined today by Seong Park. Seong, welcome to the show.
Simon, thank you. Patrick, hello. How are you?
Seong, thank you so much for joining us. It's fantastic to have you on the show.
Excellent. Looking forward to this.
So, Seong, currently Senior Vice President of Customer Success and Field Engineering at ThoughtSpot. So, you've obviously had a remarkable, very, very successful career. And we're going to talk a lot about what you're doing at the moment at ThoughtSpot, because I know it's quite an interesting project that you're building. It's a very, very interesting mission. But what I want to do first, Seong, is I want to start right from the beginning. Where did your passion for technology begin?
Yeah, it started, I think, out of university, out of college. So I actually started out studying engineering, ended up switching over to economics, and it was right around it was in the 90s. So it was right when the World Wide Web and everything was starting to just kind of, start. And I remember sitting in our at Rutgers. I went to Rutgers University, sitting in the computer science hall, just tinkering around thinking, hey, this stuff is like pretty cool, right? Playing with Gopher and FTP and kind of the first versions of the, web browsers like Mosaic, and ended up just learning how to script and program. So I learned Perl just because it seemed like kind of the cool thing to do. My first job actually was at AT&T WorldNet. Dial-up service, if you remember what that is for everyone out there. It's these little modems that you would dial up for the internet. And ended up just having I think a high degree of just curiosity, right? With just kind of technology, like how things work, and just this concept of this interconnected kind of mesh of computers and people, which, obviously is far accelerated into what it is today. So ended up just, kind of self-taught, obviously learning how to program a little bit. And that's what landed me my first real tech job at actually the Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, where I proudly built their first career site. So their job posting site on dowjones.com and wallstreetjournal.com.
Wow.
Using Perl and using just basically HTML. And then I kind of took a little bit of a foray into, at the time, them today as full stack developers. But back in the day, you ended up learning how to code, front end HTML and Perl, CGI bin, And then also trying to figure out, kind of this database thing on the back end where you stored information. So that's where I first kind of got into database programming, learning SQL, learning, Microsoft SQL Server, Sybase at the time. And that's really what kind of spurred me into technology, is kind of that love for all the cool things, because they were just coming out so fast and furious. But more importantly, it just seemed like just the in thing to do, and kind of what was, where the world was headed. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. You actually graduated in economics.
Yes.
So the convergence of technology and business was quite early then.
Yes, exactly.
Did you have an idea of what you wanted your career to be, or was it just that you were just enjoying the tech at the time, or?
It was all tech at the time. I had no clue, right? I mean, if anyone told me at the time that you could do this job where it marries both technology and business, you get to talk to customers, you get to solve real world problems, I would have said, hey, like that kind of job doesn't exist. You either, I'm Korean, Korean parents. There are only two jobs I could have done, right? Either be a doctor or be a lawyer or be an engineer, right? So there really were no other kind of paths for me in terms of, what my parents had kind of set expectations for. But, just kind of luck. I think there's timing and luck with life. And obviously there was a lot happening on the technology side. And then I think there's a bit of timing and luck with the people you meet and the network you build, right? In terms of getting you some opportunities, opening doors where, you didn't know sometimes doors existed. So there was no planning or foresight in terms of, hey, I want to get into tech because this is the wave. It just was kind of the cool thing. And it just happened to be, just by a force of events, transpiring that you just end up meeting people, right, throughout the career.
Sure. So obviously Breakaway Solutions were your roles with AT&T and Dow Jones through Breakaway Solutions?
No. So they were before Breakaway Solutions. So from Dow Jones, I ended up working with a few gentlemen who ended up leaving Dow Jones to go to work at Breakaway. So to my point. And they called me after a few months saying like, hey, Seong, they're looking for someone to do some sysadmin work. We have this concept called application, service provider. It's like a hosting company that runs applications and infrastructure for customers. And I said, well, hey, that sounds kind of interesting because I can learn more. It sounds like it kind of paid well. And it was during this whole .com, bubble, right, that was kind of building. And it was pretty cool because I live in New Jersey. And it was a job in Manhattan, in downtown. So that was another draw, is to kind of be in, working in the city, working in tech, working in Soho. And that's how I ended up going to Breakaway Solutions.
So there you would have been with, I imagine Tim Fessenden would have been there at the time. You would have had Dave was obviously at the helm at the time as well. He had quite a senior role there, and Vance and VJ was also there. So that's really the nucleus of the whole BladeLogic business, right?
It was pre-BladeLogic, exactly. So that's where I spent quite a bit of time, obviously working closely with them. But then also experiencing the joys and trials and tribulations of the .com bubble bursting, right? So, I was so happy and through the roof because it was basically a paper millionaire, right? I got all these options. Stock was high flying at the time. I was like trying to do the math. This is amazing, and it's going to keep growing. And then by the time all was said and done, obviously the stock ended up, unfortunately, kind of trading and being delisted. Ultimately, we went through rounds and rounds of layoffs after the whole .com bubble burst. But for what it's worth, it was probably the most rewarding time too, just because of the connections you make, having tried something and having, obviously learned quite a bit, but also having kind of experienced quite a bit of the failure too, because no matter how hard you tried, there was just macro, conditions, right? And macro forces that were obviously not that friendly to kind of, just tech at the time, but it was quite invigorating to be able to just meet people that ended up, me feeling like the stupidest person in the room, right? And it was me kind of getting comfortable in that skin, saying that, hey, I definitely don't know anything, and to just kind of take the mindset of being, a bit of a sponge and just kind of absorbing and learning what you can from everyone.
Yeah.
So those guys went on to go and create BladeLogic, but
Yes.
you decided not to follow them. Was the option presented to you, or did they not at the time? And you
Well,
kind of reunited
at the
later?
time, I mean, so I lasted through, I want to say proudly through 7 or 8 rounds of layoffs. So, I mean, by the time we were finally, like, I decided to leave, it was the, the fully stocked kitchen. You had the Aeron chairs, you had all the Mac equipment, everything. And then all of a sudden the office was literally like a ghost town, right? You got the tumbleweeds and like, where's the coffee? We had the Sega Genesis and the break room. And I'd mentioned earlier I was getting into databases at the time. So I said, hey, this DBA thing seems like it could be a pretty lucrative thing, pretty interesting. And I think I just naturally gravitated toward a little bit more of kind of the safety net, right? Having done now the .com, I said, hey, why don't I go to a little bit more of a traditional, maybe corporate, business. And I ended up joining Tiffany and Company, running their e-commerce database systems. So did that for a little bit of time, and then ended up going from there right after 9/11, a few months after, ended up joining a bank, investment bank. It was a Japanese investment bank called Nomura Securities on Wall Street, actually in the World Financial Center, and did that for a few years. And I got a phone call from actually a good friend of mine, Andrew Park, who was at BladeLogic. He was one of the early starters, kind of co-founders for BladeLogic, and he kind of called me up saying, "Hey, Seong." And I remember this conversation because I took it in the office, just chatting with him. He's like, "Hey, we're looking for these people." And I said, "What are you looking for?" He's like, "People who have some like sysadmin skills. They need to know Linux or Windows. They need to be able to navigate around an operating system. And you know what? They just need to have like a good personality, people that, people can like talk to and are kind of smart and can learn things." I said, "Well, I don't know anyone like that. Like, what are you looking for?" It's like, "It's a pre-sales engineer. We're calling them application engineers." And I was like, "I don't know anyone." He's like, "Well, what about you?" I was like, "I don't know. I'm really happy doing what I'm doing now." And he said, "You know what? Just talk to a few people." He connected me with, obviously I knew Dave already, but he connected me with Damon Miller, connected me with, I think, Devakar at the time, Prabhakar, and then also a few others that were just kind of early on. Had the conversation and said, "Hey, this actually sounds pretty interesting." Again, because I felt the exposure would be centered around me learning, picking up things. It was early enough. I remember I was, I forget what number employee I was. I'm probably like 50 or 60. But I remember I was the 10th SE, right? Or the 10th application engineer. We called them AEs at the time.
Yeah.
But it would be in this new kind of pre-sales mode, which I get to play with a lot of technology, kind of build the breadth and depth and become a domain expert. And then also work with customers on kind of the business problems that they're looking to solve with this new thing, which was just centered around automation around the data center, right? And how sysadmins can actually, leverage tooling to do their jobs faster, better, and to spend time on, less time on the more mundane things that are becoming commodity and really focus on kind of the high value. So it all sounded great. And it was kind of a new thing. And I met, some sales leaders and some salespeople at the time. I remember Marty Carty taking me out to dinner, a little bit of whining and dining, thinking like, "Hey, I could totally get used to this," right? Because we actually went to a fun fact, a restaurant where I ended up getting married and having, we had our reception there, my wife and I, at the Bernard's Inn in Burnsville. So it just seemed very enticing, right? Because you get to just get a lot of exposure and get into, I think, kind of the cutting edge of technology at the time.
I think it's such an interesting point, and hopefully viewers watching this may be considering a move into, be it pre-sales or something more customer facing. Did you really, after that point, take to the pre-sales world really quickly, or did you ever have any doubts that you'd gone too far away from technology?
The first 12 months, Patrick, were hell.
Really?
Hell. Yeah, because it's people nowadays talk about imposter syndrome, but for me, it's just the acute awareness of how little I knew and how much there was to learn, number one.
Yeah.
And then kind of the imposter syndrome of meeting customers and realizing that, hey, they're asking me questions that I don't have all the answers to a lot of times. And how do I be credible, but also be authentic with them to understand their problem and help solve? So it took me quite a bit of time to kind of get into that skin because, there were some tactical things you need to learn to be a great SE. You need to be able to shut up and listen. So there's kind of this active listening exercise because, as you can tell, I love to talk. And then I think there was also this core skill around being able to storytell through a demo, right? And whether you're presenting, whether you're doing a demonstration or doing a product demo or actually doing a proof of concept or some type of validation, you're weaving a story at the end of the day, right? And I think that was something that took me a little bit of time to really understand that there's an art and science to these things. But man, Patrick, the first 12 months were hell because I just felt like I was always failing. And obviously, that sales team there, high expectations.
Yeah.
And actually, it was Devakar who said this, right? Hey, Sung, like one piece of advice. I don't know if he said this when you spoke to him, but you're only as good as your last demo. Which is so true, right? Because, no matter how good you are, the minute you screw something up, it's like, well, Sung messed up that demo. So like, we're not going to close that deal. So you kind of feel the intense like pressure and the burden to always be at your best and to bring your A game. And I think that was one thing that it took me quite a bit of time just personally. I don't think, hopefully externally, I kind of showed that, but it really took me some time to kind of figure out, hey, these are the skills I need to build. I now have some fair degree of self-confidence in terms of the expertise, right? And having built those skills. And I think the mindset there was always making sure that you're staying abreast and kind of iterating, right? Learning and making sure you're absorbing. Otherwise, it was kind of the fear of also being, kind of becoming antiquated, right? If you don't know the next cool thing that either we're building or that customers are going to care about. I think that was really just that fixation almost on making sure that you really stayed on top of that.
And BladeLogic touched on so many different points of an enterprise customer's infrastructure, right? It was.
Yeah, I mean, because it was really cool because you ended up selling to obviously IT, but you also ended up selling to the business. Someone had to sign the check. So it was a really good way to cut teeth around obviously dealing and building, technical champions, right? The people who are going to be influencers, sometimes decision makers around the tech itself, but then also making sure that you're able to articulate the business pain and the business value, because at the end of the day, that's what you're selling, right? You have to identify the pain, prove that there's pain there, validate it, show it to the prospect, right? Or to the customer, and then say, here's how we'll help you solve it and prove that out. And if you take that into account, it was really great of a proving ground for any pre-sales, I think, engineer or consultant to understand selling high and selling to the business, but also selling wide, throughout the account, but also through to other, I guess, all the personae that you have to deal with, right? So it was great just to kind of cut your teeth, and obviously met a ton of great people there, both in the sales world and also in the pre-sales world, as you know.
How important do you think the pre-sales organization was in the overall success of BladeLogic?
Wow, I would say absolutely probably the most important thing. I mean, because, well, think about it. And I hope most of the sales leaders will agree, because it's really where the rubber meets the road, right? If you think about how to bridge that business and technology gap so that you can really, identify the pain, prove it out, but prove it in a way that is well differentiated as well as well quantified. Devil's in the details, right? And I think this is where we really ended up earning our paychecks, is being able to execute super well on that whole kind of spectrum of things that happen in the initial onset of meeting a prospect, understanding that pain through great discovery, and then executing as well as you can through, building champions, really, really focusing in on that pain. And then also quantifying like how we can actually help, because you have to justify some amount of spend and kind of prove out that, hey, we can save your time, instead of having to patch and upgrade these servers, spending hours a week times, 50 weeks that you're working because I'm counting the 2 weeks of vacation. What number does that actually mean in terms of actual, FTE time as well as dollars? So long-winded way of saying, I think, every great sales organization has an even greater pre-sales organization right there with them, right? Because I think it truly is one of the most unique roles where you have that perfect marriage of business and technology. And it's really, like I said before, you're only as good as your last demo, or you're only as good as your last POC. So you have to maintain kind of that high bar of execution excellence. So if they had a crappy pre-sales team at BladeLogic, I guarantee it probably would not have been as fun of a ride, or as quick of a ride to kind of the outcomes that happened there.
And what enabled the building of such a great pre-sales organization, in your opinion?
Probably a few key factors, right? We had obviously, the biggest change was when we changed sales leaders, I'll say. So I'll talk about sales first. So, obviously when John McMahon kind of came on board and came to the helm, it was a totally different sales world, right? I mean, no disrespect to obviously the prior sales regime, because, it got us there, but what got us there wasn't going to get us to, I think, where we were trying to head. And I think with John, he instilled kind of this almost strong sense of belief that, it's a team, we're taking a hill together, sales and pre-sales, right? It wasn't anything like, oh, hey, we're just kind of a tool in a toolkit, just, bring out the SE when they're needed, do the demo, and then kind of tuck them back in the closet, and they'll, do their little propeller head things. I know that, it was kind of the joke, but it was truly kind of a galvanizing thing to really understand how important we were viewed by sales in selling. So I think that belief, number one, was important. I think we had some fantastic leaders, right? So if you think about like Damon Miller, and if you think about Tim Fessenden, if you think about Devakar, they all instilled, I think, their own kind of flavor of, what was needed to be a successful, SE.
Yeah. And
it came down to, I think, things that I still employ in my playbook, right? It's like how you recruit, it's how you train, and what you do to ultimately kind of set the expectation of the role. Because I truly believe you can't do a role or a job well unless you know exactly what the job is, right? So you have to be super clear as far as, hey, you need to kick ass with your presentations, right? You need to kick ass with your demos, and you need to execute your POCs flawlessly. If you just do those three things well, then usually, you end up with some pretty damn good results. But you also get, I think, a really good way to kind of, I don't want to say filter out anything, but the SEs who end up doing those things well kind of rise to the top. Let's put it that way, right? Because that really helped us, I think, scale the pre-sales organization, but also I think rise to the occasion as far as how fast we're growing on the sales side as well. And the last thing I'll say is, I think with any piece of software, enterprise software, it had its warts, right? It was not perfect. And I think any SE worth their weight in gold basically earns it by knowing where the skeletons are, where some of the pitfalls are, knowing how to avoid them, position around them, but more importantly, focus on the things that made us different than our main competitor at the time, which was, Opsware, right? So it was kind of a great way to have, so think about this dynamic. You had John galvanizing the sales team, right? And really setting forward with some discipline, some accountability, a methodology that works, how to qualify the hell out of deals, making sure pre-sales were involved. So like you felt like a team. You had a mission, right? Because, hey, we wanted to be obviously a, damn big company, but also we had a competitor, right? With Opsware. So we had an enemy that helped us galvanize even further and really helped us focus in on, I think, the mission or the task at hand. And then you had honestly a bunch of great, smart group of people on the pre-sales side that just figured it out along the way, because there was no playbook at the time. And we just kind of figured out the things that mattered and distilled it down to that, because we honestly had no time or bandwidth to kind of waste in reality.
So that's an interesting point. So there was a playbook for the sales side, but the playbook wasn't really defined on the pre-sales side at that point?
A playbook meaning, John came in with his playbook, Like, you know what John's about because he honed that over the craft of, several companies.
Yeah.
I'm saying on the pre-sale side, we did have to figure out a few things that align to what sales was doing. I think that's really what I mean more than anything, because if you think about like what I've learned and employed, it's probably not too far off from what, I learned from John and from like Carlos de la Torre and from, some of the great sales leaders I've worked with, Scott Davis, like they are all kind of disciples of, how to sell and how to run sales organizations. And for me, we had to just make sure we adapted and complemented that, right? Because the rate in which we grow and expand and drive, kind of the sales organization, you have to keep up and sometimes be a little bit of ahead, because, any great SE organization is able to help enable and kind of get, reps productive as well, right? They have usually a pretty big part in that, especially when it's a very deep, heavy technical product. So I didn't mean to say like, hey, we had no playbook, but it was really just adapting what we already kind of had around like some learnings and some hypotheses, and really making sure that it was very complementary to what sales was doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess on the pre-sales side, the playbook kind of alters a little bit more company to company based on the differences in tech, right?
Absolutely, right? Because I think as tech has progressed, even in the last, decade, so like MongoDB, for example, like open source, like what does that mean? And then I think even with the role I'm at now, which I'm sure we'll talk about, it's I think evolved even further with the advent of cloud, with SaaS, with how we think about, when we look at customers and the customer journey. Because think about it, we held the keys to the kingdom back then to software. You had to interface with us in order to even get hands-on keyboard, right? To look at the software, versus now you have the free trials, you have open source, you have, SaaS, where you don't even need to talk to anyone if you really didn't want to, and kind of get a product experience, right? Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of nuance around that for sure. But, to my point, BladeLogic was such an awesome proving ground. It was a great place to cut your teeth, because it was also where I went from an individual contributor to a manager. Obviously, it's just a time that I look back with a lot of, fondness, just because of the connections I've made, but also the fact that we kind of pulled it out, right? As far as having a great outcome with an IPO and then an acquisition, right? With kind of the bigger companies. So,
yeah, amazing. And just to take it back slightly, Seong, so obviously a difficult first 12 months. And then, as you mentioned, obviously you developed, you moved into management. What were the kind of key things that really triggered for you to take that step into presumably excelling at pre-sales and then into leadership?
I remember this conversation. I was actually in my car driving over the Tappan Zee Bridge, I was obviously going north. I forget if I was going to upstate New York somewhere, or if I was going to maybe Connecticut. I forget exactly where I was going, but I remember the conversation in the car, because Carlos de la Torre, and Carlos was I know on the series before, called me up saying like, "Hey, Seong, what do you think about being a manager?" I said, "Hey, man, I really enjoy what I'm doing." And remember that imposter syndrome thing from before? Yeah. I was like, I've never managed before. Why would you even like want to look at me? I don't want to like, F things up. And he kind of talked me through and convinced me, saying, "Hey, like it'd be great for you to take the opportunity, lead the team, because obviously you're, and he said it, I don't know if I think he meant it like, hey, you're doing really well. Everyone kind of looks up to you. And it'd be great for you to be able to kind of help us in terms of how we're expanding and growing the pre-sales organization, as well as, the expansion in sales." So I remember, coming home, talking to my wife, Jen, and just saying like, "Hey, what do you think?" She's like, absolutely. I mean, I'll save that. And she's like, "You have to take it. Like, this is a great opportunity for you." So said, yes, yeah, let's do it. Right. And I think it was not by me force of nature wanting to get into leadership and management. It was actually Carlos, and I owe him so much to just kind of him thinking highly enough of me at the time and having him, enough confidence to say that. So that was my first step into it, into management at BladeLogic. And it was a small team. And obviously I knew everyone too, right? Because we work side by side. And the transition ended up probably being much easier than I thought, for what it's worth.
Sure.
So the 33 CXOs were hired against the ICE criteria. It's obviously well documented, the criteria that they were using, John was using to hire and identify high potential sales guys with the right attitude, the right attributes. What was the criteria for pre-sales?
Not too dissimilar, right? So we were looking for obviously technical aptitude. Like that was the baseline watermark. You have to have some demonstrated depth and breadth in technology.
Does it have to be relevant tech, or could it be?
Usually for BladeLogic, it did, because we were obviously selling to a particular profile, and we were very much focused on a wide breadth of operating systems at the time. So whether it was like HPUX or AIX or Linux or Windows, we were looking for some degree of hands-on depth. We were definitely looking for a high index of learning as well. So when I mentioned just the curiosity, there's the intellectual curiosity, the technical curiosity, always asking questions, wanting to learn more. I didn't know it at the time, but it was kind of this whole growth mindset. How do you go and kind of challenge yourself? And how do I just continuously find ways to, learn and improve? So we were looking for technical aptitude and have that be demonstrated and well-defined. I was also looking for kind of the high index around learning. And I was also looking for, honestly, we call it kind of the X factor. But the X factor comes in the form of just that passion and kind of that drive. And, we call it drive and grit today. But it was just, someone with high horsepower and the ability to have that, I think, demonstrated work ethic. And, the thing we stole from sales was coachability, right? John McMahon always talks about, how coachable is the candidate, is the individual, is the team member. And obviously that has a lot of connection and correlation to, I think, the ability to have that kind of growth mindset, because you want to always be constantly taking in feedback and finding ways to improve. And I think it's a really, really good trait that I think, honestly, whether you're in pre-sales or not, is just good for kind of a lifetime, right? From a career perspective, regardless of the role, right? Is just having that like openness to coachability. Because honestly, you have to remove some of the emotion and the defensiveness as humans we have. It's like, well, hey, you just said my demo sucked. Like, well, screw you, right? I thought my demo was fine, but hey, here are the things you could have done to make it that much better, right? A simple example. But I think those were the things we looked at, right? Is technical aptitude and the depth, right? Because you have to have it. Like that's kind of a given. We were looking at, obviously, how much of that intellectual curiosity they had. We were looking for that drive, right? X factor, grit, that ability to just kind of go and go. And then coachability, right? If we find that kind of perfect mix, we ended up, having some just great hires and people who've been super successul. And I tell you stories about a few of them too. I think you spoke to one of them already, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose in terms of, that environment, why do you think some of the pre-sales guys were able to elevate and kind of grow with it, and some perhaps didn't have the success that maybe some others did? What do you think was the difference?
Yeah, I mean, so assuming all the other things I just said are the same, right? That we all came in with that kind of level playing field, then I do think the thing that ended up making a little bit of a difference, if you look at it, is how much you ended up really understanding and aligning to sales, especially sales leadership, right? Because there's one thing to build credibility with the reps, right? Because they'll just naturally kind of bring you into every deal, right? Saying like, hey, Mike or Sahir or John, come, right? Because I need you, important meeting. I need you to like go crush this meeting. So you build that kind of confidence and credibility. But I think aligning to what the sales leaders were trying to do and understanding like their goals. I know it sounds like such a simple thing, but kind of endearing yourself to the things that mattered to them, I think really helped with the career progression for a lot of the SEs, right? Those are the, I think, SEs that were kind of earmarked, like to my example around Carlos. Hey, I did everything I could to support him, hand over fist, anything. Same with Dan Fougere, right? Who are kind of my core team over in the East. And I think that's part of why he probably called me to say like, hey, I trust you. I have confidence in you. are you ready for the next step? So I feel like there's that kind of angle from a career progression perspective to kind of be viewed as like leadership, management potential. I think the other side of it too was, hey, you got to be good at your craft. And you got to be like really good at just being, you hear about audible readiness and, handling the curveballs and handling the objections. And those are the things that you just don't, you can't teach completely. You have to have some of that innate kind of ability to have that situational fluency. And you build that credibility because look at the reps, right? The reps that were there at BladeLogic are now CROs and presidents now at companies today. So I think it's just really making sure that you executed well and you were able to intuitively understand what the reps were trying to do and just be there as their partner in crime. I think that's really what kind of set it apart, because there were some SEs that were, hey, day job, been doing it, as career SEs already. And, they were great, like B pluses, right? A minuses, but they weren't necessarily going that extra mile to like really, I think, make sure that they did everything they could to get that, that well-executed meeting so that that opportunity converts into an actual deal and to really, have kind of the rep and the sales leader's best interests in mind. I don't know if that resonates.
No, it does, absolutely. Do you think that's a mindset thing? Do you think that gap is a mindset thing, or do you think it's a capacity thing?
I do think it's probably a little bit of both, Simon, right? Because you have to be smart enough and aware enough to know that, hey, this is how you operate as a team and how you best collaborate. And I think the second piece is, there probably is quite a bit of, learning that has to happen on the job. So if you're smart enough, you kind of pick up on these things, right? And I had no clue Carlos was going to be doing what he's doing now, right? At the time, I just thought, hey, he's a smart guy, he knows what he's doing. He's hard nosed and he expects a lot, but he knows how to sell. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure he's successful and support that. So it wasn't even like I was, again, thinking about getting in good graces with like Carlos or Dan or others. It was more about, hey, I see them as kind of excellent in their craft. And I just want to be kind of a part of that, if that makes sense. So it just kind of naturally happened for me. But again, I can't speak for others. I'm sure there are others that are probably a little more professionally minded and have more thoughtfulness around kind of their career, if that makes sense.
So I suppose as standards for pre-sales and sales globally, as we see them today, obviously BladeLogic, it's well documented how high performing that sales and pre-sales harmony was. But how significant do you think it is in actually maybe laying some foundation of what is regarded as best practice in the kind of technology sales world that we live in today?
Oh my God. If you look at just the sales process and the methodology and the, medic or med pick around it as far as qualification, I think that's definitely laid the groundwork for what the pre-sales part is in all of those things, right? So if you think about a well-documented, executed sales process and methodology, SE has quite a few big parts in it, right? If you think about how well they do discovery, how well they scope, more importantly, how well they're actually executing on the validation, right? The proof of concept. Like those three things, without executing those with excellence and with almost perfection, deals won't close. I think we all know that. So that's a tried and true methodology and process that I think is employed by probably a wide swath of technology and software companies today. So I do think that, for me, if you see where, again, where the sales leaders dispersed and the sales team and, sales reps dispersed, and then where the pre-sales teams went, I think there's a lot of that BladeLogic kind of roots that you see in kind of a really broad set of companies today across the board. So absolutely, for sure. I think there was a lot of goodness there that really is the foundation for what you're seeing in terms of execution excellence with, pre-sales in many, many companies.
That's really interesting. So 2007, BladeLogic scaled towards the IPO, right? It must have been a very exciting.
Yeah, I think we actually IPO 2008, if I remember correctly, because we were actually doing a massive POC with Bank of America. I remember this one. It was 6 proof of concepts in parallel. So it was like unheard of that we would do 6. We had honestly the entire SE team in one of these 6 locations, all distributed, working on different parts of, the requirements. I, in particular, had one where I was working with the database team, the Oracle team at Bank of America, and automating their Oracle builds. We were in Manhattan at the time, in Midtown. And I remember myself and a few others, we ended up doing it. We were joking, it was a little bit of a drive-by IPO, if I remember correctly, because we had the IPO. We were there at the NASDAQ. I think it was NASDAQ. Got the pictures, saw the things and everything. And then we had to actually hop on a plane and go for the next day for the POC.
Wow.
Down in, man, was it, I think it was North Carolina, I think. But it was amazing, right? Because like it was such a great highlight from a professional perspective, but then you never you were reminded of the fact that you still had a job to do, right? Because we were doing this POC that had to execute well.
Yeah.
So that was 2008, if I remember correctly, because I think I have a shirt somewhere with 2008 IPO for BladeLogic on there. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then obviously shortly after the BMC acquisition, obviously a huge transition. How did that feel at that point?
Remember those first 12 months at BladeLogic? It was like that, but worse, only because we felt like, hey, I mean, in a different way though, because we were a small company. We were only a few hundred people, now being, acquired by this, much bigger company. It was a few thousand. I think it was like 6,000 at the time.
Yeah. And
our first, obviously we were happy about the acquisition because it was a pretty cool outcome, because Opsware had just been picked up already as well, I think. And we ended up having the first experience in, it was Nashville for sales kickoff. So we were just kind of a little small group of people trying to like stay together. I remember sitting in some big meeting room with the BMC team, kind of walking through details of what the acquisition meant, what you can expect. Here's like, what kind of stock you get, and here's like the roles, and here's some HR people and everything. But we ended up being a team of, I want to say 40, maybe 50 SEs being swallowed up by, I think it was maybe a few hundred, being part of a much larger organization. And honestly, like people weren't that friendly, man. It was like, you had kind of the, a few of them, and I'm not going to name names, but one of them, they kind of say like, hey, what do you know, kind of thing. It's like, you've been doing this for a few years. You come from a little rinky dink, company that we just bought. Yeah. So like, hey, this is how the big boys play in enterprise software. So it was kind of that, a little bit of that mentality. But I will say this, it took when I say 12 months, little did these people know it was a reverse takeover. Right. So, by the time all was said and done, like, guess who was on top? It was obviously John and sales leadership. And remember, I was running the East at the time for BladeLogic, and they ended up, figuring out ways to just incorporate all the BladeLogic leadership in pre-sales with the other BMC leadership. So you had kind of these like weird 2 managers in one area or one region situation. So you knew eventually this was all going to consolidate and there was going to be a little bit of a bake-off. Yeah. That's what I mean, Patrick, when it was, 12 months of just like, difficulty, because it's like, hey, part of me was like, I'm competing against other pre-sales leaders who've been doing this a while and obviously are expert. And then you've got this upstart group of like really smart, hungry SEs who were just like, kind of scrapping, right, in a way. So I think that mindset was definitely there, but obviously we know how that turned out. Just saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for our viewers, maybe who've recently been through an acquisition, who have only maybe just been in pre-sales roles selling point solutions before, moving to an organization with such a wide portfolio, how did that help you or challenge you? Was it a positive overall?
I think there were every product at BMC had an acronym. So it was number one, learning all the acronyms. To your point, there were pillars, right? There was obviously, the help desk, like, change management, ITSM solutions. We were part of like now the automation. They had acquired a company called Marimba at the time for desktop automation. And we were kind of filling out the portfolio on the server side and the data center side. And then you had kind of this, predictive, monitoring, as well as, the service assurance business line that they called it. So it was great, right? Just to get a little bit well-grounded in, again, enterprise software selling. Because remember, we were one product, even though it wasn't a point like app or a solution, it was still a complex sale. It became even more complex now, being able to honestly sell even higher and understand the dynamics there, right? Because we talked about how to fill in the white space when a company has like everything in kind of the business service management. It was BSM portfolio that BMC was selling. Well, here's now how BladeLogic fits into kind of the broader portfolio. But hey, we felt like mercenaries in a way, right? Because we were like the specialists that would help with the BladeLogic piece. So at that point in time, as a manager, I remember spending quite a bit of time trying to learn the portfolio. But to answer your question, there was definitely a lot of learning in terms of reframing the conversation, right, with customers, right? Because now you're talking about a portfolio. And then also really understanding how we fit, but also how much of remember I mentioned process and methodology, that we had kind of been just ingrained, like this is how we do it. A lot of that ended up, I think, being very useful to kind of marry that methodology and rigor and discipline in terms of how we sell and how we qualify, right, as pre-sales professionals, to kind of a broader portfolio, if that makes sense, right? Because there was a lot of opportunity there for us to obviously do things better. And I think that was really one of the key factors in obviously BMC's success, right? Is you had the reverse takeover with John taking over sales. So already instantly there was this change in sales discipline and accountability and methodology and process. And we were able to take a pretty big portfolio of products and do the same. But, I happen to have a great leader as well. I mean, obviously Vance was there, Tim was there, but I ended up working for a gentleman by the name of Andy Harwood for quite some time. He's off and, kind of enjoying, kind of greener pastures right now. I know he's been doing a lot of like hiking and walking and his, not having to work. Great for him. But I learned so much from him as well, right? Just in terms of, he wasn't BladeLogic, but I think what he was able to do, remember I said he was able to, the people that rise to the top adapt. He was a longtime BMC pre-sales software consultant, was in leadership, and he just instantly adapted to what everything, obviously John was doing. And he ran worldwide pre-sales, right? And I think that's why he was so successful running that pre-sales organization for as long as he did. Before he left.
Wow. So even though he was legacy, he was able to instantly adapt to those methodologies to.
It took a bit of time. Yeah. But I mean, I think he was, he understood and he got it. Right. And if I remember anything, it's explain, demo, prove. That's what he instilled in the pre-sales organization. Right. These are the pillars. This is the expertise. And he's Welsh. So, I'm not going to butcher the way he says it, guys, but he would always say explain, demo, prove. So it was simple enough for us to galvanize around, but simple enough to have us basically have the clear, again, understanding of what it is we needed to do in pre-sales. And then he would also, he had other three things, right? So it was always around recruit, reward, and retain. Right. As far as leadership, right. Make sure you're always recruiting. That stayed as part of my playbook, making sure that you're recognizing and rewarding. Right. And as far as like how you're building out careers, building out career paths, making sure that you recognize for great, performance, building a meritocracy. So all those things he instilled, and, he might be someone interesting to talk to as well, because he's just a great guy. But, to my point, he really did well to kind of adapt to the sales methodology and process and everything that was happening. And also he just ended up picking some great leaders to kind of run the teams for him as well. Just saying.
Did you see a shift in momentum? So at first there might have been a bit of resistance, from both sides, I suppose. You perhaps resisted them, they resisted you. Did you see that kind of shift in momentum?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if any of the sales leaders from BladeLogic, really brought this up, but there was so much of this going on. Some was very blatant, and some was not so, a little more passive aggressive, I should say. It still manifested quite a bit, I think, in even the pre-sales organization, because again, remember the kind of the general mindset, right? The general environment we stepped into is like, we acquired you, little BladeLogic team. Like it wasn't anything, more than that. And again, it wasn't nefarious or malicious. I think it was just kind of the mindset. Honestly, if I were BMC longtime, SE leader, I probably would have just had that same mentality. No one would have, I think, expected that. But it did manifest itself that way, and it all played out, especially if you look at who ended up running EMEA for sales and for pre-sales, who ended up running, obviously, the Americas. All the sales leaders from BladeLogic ended up, for the most part, right? It was Adam, I think, obviously Carlos and others that ended up kind of taking critical roles where you had two leaders, the BMC leader and the BladeLogic leader. So that didn't happen overnight. That took a bit of time. So there was a little bit of like conflict and some contention, but hey, like it was expected, right? Because I don't think there's any simple way to do it, right? Someone's going to be unhappy. And I think that was definitely the situation over the course of the first 12 months there.
Yeah. So one of your playbook elements is always be recruiting. So at BMC, you can see clear progression over your 7 years. You started as a manager of the Northeast, made your way to director, AVP, VP of worldwide sales specialization,
I forgot about that.
and then VP of worldwide pre-sales and technical account management. So there's clear progression. At what point were you able to start implementing playbook elements like always be recruiting?
Yeah. So, I mean, I obviously learned that from BladeLogic. I don't think I really knew it at the time because it was always, the rule of three, right? And it's actually something John had said. So if you take that, here's the interesting story behind this, right? So I was the Northeast manager, and they were looking for an Americas director for pre-sales. So the gentleman that was running it, Jeff Hodges, at the time said, hey, I've kind of run my course, and he was kind of stepping down. So it was, kind of a known thing. Andy Harwood and Vance were actually interviewing for a director for Americas. I remember this too because we were in Vegas at a kickoff. And if you were interested, you had to set up some time with Andy to talk to him because he was obviously the hiring manager. And I remember I was in a room of 20 some odd, pre-sales leaders. And remember, just that imposter syndrome again, right? I think that's kind of the common theme here. Looking around the room, hey, you've got all these like BMC people that have been here for a while. They'll probably just get the job. And look, it's Andy. So he's a BMC guy. So he's going to just pick someone. And everyone ended up talking to Andy. I remember sitting back during the QBR and kind of the kickoff session thinking like, yeah, I'm not even going to try. Cause like, why would he even consider me? And like, do I really want this thing? And I remember Andy pulled me aside towards the end. We were just done with the QBR and kind of wrapped up. And he's like, hey, Seong, just want to chat with you for a little bit. I don't know if he remembers this. We were pulled out in kind of the meeting area. All the other leaders were kind of spilling out. And he was just saying like, hey, just heard a lot of great things about you. Just curious why you, didn't put your name in for this. I was like, and I kind of told him, I was like, hey, I don't know if I'm like fully ready or not. And it feels like there might be other better qualified candidates, but hey, I'd love to just get to know you better, Andy. And we just chatted for a little bit. And then I remember thinking after my plane ride back home, driving from the airport to my house, thinking, what a stupid ass I am. Like, why didn't I just put my name in just for at least a visibility, but also just to go through the process with Andy, who's like going to be potentially my boss's boss. And he seemed like such a great guy. So I remember calling Vance saying like, Vance, I think I like effed up. Like I actually didn't put my name in the hat for this with Andy. And I really don't know if like it's too late, but I'd love to get my name into the mix. He's like, hey, Seong, hold on. I'm actually talking to Andy right now. So he puts me on hold and then he switches over and then he, I guess, talks to Andy and he comes back and says, hey, Andy's going to talk to you. So reach out to him. And that's all she wrote, right? Because it ended up working out. Obviously I got the gig. But it was great to be able to, again, just get out of my comfort zone. Yeah. And also realize how much of a stupid ass I was. I actually give my wife credit for that because she's the one who said, like, you're a dumbass. Why didn't you, like, just go through with it and, like, talk to him? And I remember the whole interview process being great because it was with the sales leadership too, right? It was Jim Drill who was running Americas at the time, and we had all the BladeLogic sales leaders. So I remember, I don't know if Andy knows this. I don't know if I ever told him. Carlos again called me because they had this big powwow in Houston. They had this QBR. They had the planning. Everyone had gone through all the interviews. And he called me up excitedly saying like, hey, Seong, you got the gig. I'm not supposed to tell you, but congratulations. I'm really looking forward to this. Everyone's like really excited. And then I hung up thinking like, yes, because I remember I was in my basement at the time, just through the roof, just excited. And then Andy called me a few minutes later saying like, hey, Seong, congratulations. And so I had to pretend a little bit like, oh my God, thank you so much. But it was amazing too, because the one thing that I absolutely remember too is my conversation with Frank Lamprey, because he was competing for it as well. And, we were friends. We had obviously worked together, somewhat closely at BladeLogic, but that was actually the catalyst for me, because we had what ended up being a very adult conversation saying like, hey, I know you didn't get it. I know I got it, but vice versa. He was there saying like, hey, I will support you in any which way I can. Like, hey, we're like big boys here, really happy you got it. And that meant so much to me just on a personal level. And obviously, you've spoken to Frank. He's just absolutely amazing, right? Just a great guy and just so proficient and just a master of his craft. And I remember thinking like, hey, this is probably not going to be so bad, right? Because again, there was a little bit of like the happiness and then the fear of like, hey, I've got this like big role now with, I forget, it was like 100 something SEs and like 15 managers. A lot of them more experienced than me. And now I've got this job. So I've got to roll up my sleeves and figure out how I'm going to do this thing. So I know I'm talking a lot, but this is, it was a really exciting, like pivotal moment for me at BMC to be able to kind of get the big role. And then I think that's really where I figured out, hey, people are going to quit on you. We're going to have to promote a few people. They're going to surprise you. So like start recruiting, build out that pipeline. And I really learned that from, I think, things that John talks about with like reps, always recruit, right? Because like reps are going to churn and you're going to see that. And just kind of applied that, right, in kind of my leadership role there. And Andy was obviously, I said like recruit, retain, reward, right? Like that's what you do as a leader. That's your job, is to recruit.
So even if there's not an open role, you are on the lookout for talent.
Always pipeline, right? Because, just you don't start looking when you get an open role. That's the worst thing you can do. Right. Because then you spend 3 months trying to find someone versus you build a network, you build the connections, even though, the people that you want ultimately are not in play players, right? They're already gainfully employed and happy somewhere, but you wait for those opportunities. And then, and you remember, hey, I've got this opportunity now. Remember, we talked about it. Timing's here if you're interested. And you have a pipeline of candidates, right? Because you need 4 or 5, 10. That at any moment you can basically, as a leader, be there to potentially hire. So learn that lesson very quickly. Otherwise, you end up losing quite a bit of time. And like I said, we never had that luxury, right? Like it was painful when we couldn't hire fast enough and we couldn't hire good people well enough, right? It was kind of a double-edged sword there because I learned the lesson very early. Just don't put butts in seats. Because like the pain and the cost of making a bad hire ends up hurting you more than, the little bit of relief that you get from just having an open head count that you need to fill. Yeah. So recruiting is one of the most important things by far for any leader. Yeah.
I think that's fascinating insight. That role and that promotion at BMC, so you took on the whole Americas region, around 100 SEs, as you mentioned. Was that a real moment where you felt you moved away from the technology from a hands-on perspective, from an understanding perspective?
Sadly, yes. Obviously I kept my chops pretty good on the BladeLogic technology, but I think that's when I really started realizing that the art and the science of, leading a team and managing managers, like again, those first 12, 18 months were a lot of learning for myself. And I think that's when I did end up realizing that I couldn't spend as much time on the tech, right? And that there was actually, I don't want to say little value. You still need to know your tech, but I wasn't going to be hands-on keyboard running a POC, right? I actually was now responsible for making sure that, the 15 POCs that happened in any given month executed well, right? So figuring that out, but to honestly call bullshit when you see bullshit too with the team. That's important, right? So you can't be too far removed, but like the better way to phrase it is the focus ended up being not on the hands-on tech in terms of how I was measured, right, for success in the role. Let's put it that way. But I obviously still needed to maintain the tech as much as I could. But yeah, if I look back on the career, that's definitely one area where, or one time where I can see me moving away more from, obviously the more traditional kind of very deep technical pre-sales responsibility.
So what did you do to upskill or to kind of acquire the new skills that you needed to have in your armory?
Oh man, I was just like guessing, Simon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let's try this. All right, I read this book. Let's try that. And then let me talk to Andy about this, and let me talk to others and see what works. A lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was process of elimination. A lot of it was using Andy as a sounding board. But also, I mean, there were some great leaders there too, and Frank, and people like Frank as well, right? And then I had a trusted group of people on the team that I always kind of went to. So like Sahir, he and I would talk about all sorts of things. I'd be able to kind of at least bounce things off him. Same thing with Frank. I think same thing with Damon. Definitely with Tim. Devakar. I mean, there was always kind of a ready group of people that I could bounce things off of to either validate or to, refute what I was thinking. But quite honestly, a lot of it was trying to rely as much on what I had already learned in terms of making sure I'm aligned very closely with, sales, right? Because I need to make sure that Jim and Carlos and others are 100%, getting what they need. And I understand and kind of anticipate what it is they might need, right? So having a really open and steady cadence with them. And then also, honestly, just figuring out like how to manage people is a hard thing. So like one of the skills that I think I did learn was just being able to have a difficult conversation. People generally shy away from that, right? Because it's not easy to have, conflict or contention or that awkward moment where you're giving someone some like really tough feedback and then also expecting them to, change their behavior or to, ultimately even like let go someone. So I think I really just by trial by fire learned that skill because I had to, let's put it that way. No one was coaching me necessarily saying like, this is how you have a conversation. We did some training later, right? With, having, difficult conversations and some of the soft skills. But I think that was one of the things that I definitely picked up early. But, to answer your question, it was not out of a book or someone teaching me. And, as great as Andy is as a leader and as a manager, I obviously learned a lot from him, just from like his feedback to me. But you kind of have to own it and do it yourself at the end of the day, right? And I made mistakes, right? And looking back, of course, I definitely would have done some things differently. But you live and learn, and I think that's ultimately, what's important is how well you can admit to those mistakes and also recover from them very quickly.
Sure.
And not do it again, right?
So part of your playbook, another element of your playbook is train people and then train them some more. Is that something that you took from BladeLogic or BMC or what? Just tell us a little bit about that as an element of your playbook.
Yeah. So, we call it keeping the sword sharp, right? So I think I definitely picked up a lot of that from obviously the BladeLogic days, right? Because John and the mantra was to train the reps. No matter how much you train them more on methodology, on the product, competitive, intel, on the differentiators, on how to run a first meeting, how to actually have a conversation with, a prospect and a customer. So you take that to heart and obviously apply it on the technology side. And like I said, I think the mindset around staying abreast of technology and kind of being ahead of that is super important. So we made that a focal point at BladeLogic to stay ahead of obviously, what's happening with BladeLogic and kind of the broad set of technologies that we dealt with, right? Operating system and kind of starting to go up the stack, the application stack and with databases. And then at BMC, obviously we had a huge portfolio, like I said, and we were thinking about, hey, how do we do like major minors, but then also think about how adept we want people to be across, the portfolio. So that was my first real experience with dealing with a big enablement function. And I think that's where we really honed it, right? We learned the core concept and the philosophy at BladeLogic, but BMC is where we actually learned how to do it, both from a sales methodology perspective, doing like the sales boot camps, right, for the 2 weeks, doing the constant quarterly training, pre and post QBR. That's really where we learned the operating cadence around that, but then also how to deliver it, and then also learn how to really hone what it is we were doing, whether it was a technical piece of training, product training, or more importantly, soft skill. So again, BMC is where I think a lot of that was refined, because I think we still, a lot of us still probably use a lot of the playbooks from there. But you can't train people enough, right? And I think it's one of these things, especially in pre-sales, where you have to be, staying on top of the market and the product and the competition. So it's one of these things that honestly just part and parcel with the job.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So after running the Americas, Seong, for several years, you took on briefly, as we said, a VP of worldwide sales specialization before taking on a huge role of VP of worldwide pre-sales and technical account management.
Right.
Talk us through that transition.
Yeah. So those 4 months were me trying to, Andy had actually convinced me at the time, because we had gone through some changes with some sales leadership and company changes. Hey, might be good for you to look at the sales specialist team, which was kind of an overlay team. It wasn't pre-sales, but it was a role that he thought I might be a good fit for. At the time, it kind of made sense, but I don't know, 1 or 2 months into it, I realized this was not my sweet spot. And then we had more organizational changes anyway, because at that time at BMC, it was just change after change after change. So ended up, every SE at some point probably considers going into sales at some point. That was my dipping the toe in the water, realizing, hey, screw this, it's not for me. And then also the reorg ended up just making that answer pretty easy. So then the worldwide role ended up it was worldwide in the sense I ran basically the team that supported the showcase accounts, we call them at BMC. So all the big accounts, it was $650 million book of business. And I owned all the functions. So pre-sales, like the software consultants, we were building out and obviously scaling out a business value consulting team, so the value engineering team. And then we had this, technical account management team, which was kind of the precursor for what you know as customer success today, and what you hear so often is the TAM. Yeah. So did that for a few years. And again, I think at some point, it was pretty clear to me that there was a lot of challenges, but also the market, the world was kind of changing, right? So for me, it ended up being a great way to learn some additional functions, I want to say, especially running and leading a BVC team. And then honestly, learning what I did back then really helps in my current role, right? From a customer success point of view. So it was a great transition. And again, I did this all under Andy Harwood, right? And it was something that, again, I'm forever indebted to him for again, having the belief, right, in me, and understanding that, hey, he would constantly give me more scope and more role. And I think at that point, it was, a pretty large team at the time. So it was definitely kind of a good way, right, for me to think about the evolution, right, having been acquired in and having, just like this Northeast team of SE specialists to now having kind of this worldwide role. It was pretty great, right, to look back at that time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So April 2015, I imagine, was it Carlos that called you up and said,
yeah,
come across?
I mean, he called me before then. Obviously, that's when I jumped ship, because I remember him calling me, and he had been trying to get me over to a few places too, right? Because he was over at ClearSlide. Strangely enough, I guess I can say it now. So I did interview and accept a job at App Dynamics back in 2013.
Oh, wow.
To run pre-sales. I had some stuff going on kind of the personal side at the time. So ended up accepting and having to renege on it, which was obviously just unbeknownst to me, like I just had to get my head wrapped around it. But like looking back, it was kind of a tough time, but at the same time, it was kind of the best move I made because obviously everything worked out in kind of the long run. Carlos tapped me on the shoulder. Obviously, I knew Dave Itticheria.
Yeah, of course.
And, just the fact alone that it was kind of in the database space and having had some experience in data and databases, he's like, hey, Seong, just got the CRO gig. What do you think? You want to be my kind of partner in crime? I'm condensing it, of course. And, we had a lot of conversations. I ended up having to talk to Dave Itticheria. And remember, he was on the board at AppD. I think he was the one that actually kind of introduced me to the folks over at AppD. And when I kind of pulled out, I remember thinking like, crap, like I'm like disappointing him. And I'm like, just not in a good place with him. He called me out on it as any great, leader should do. And we talked through it and he's like, hey, I'm good. So like, if, let's do this thing. So it was a pretty easy conversation, but it was also a pretty exciting one because remember I said, we are so accustomed to owning keys to the kingdom. We had this open source database that, talk about being the stupidest person in the room. I had 3 or 4 meetings with the co-founder and CTO, Elliot, and remember thinking like, God, like I feel so stupid and I have no idea like why they're even like talking to me. And I remember the funny thing there was I'd shown up in I think a suit the first time when I met him. And then the second time I ended up probably not wearing a tie. And then the third time I ended up wearing jeans and like a blazer. And then I remember his like little snarky comment to me saying like, oh, hey, I think you'll be okay. You're starting to get the picture, right? Like get the hint. Because it was very casual. Everyone's in t-shirts, hoodies, right? Startup. So I remember thinking just, again, even then, even though it was 5 years ago, just feeling very intimidated, right? Being surrounded by uber smart people. But I think that was a slightly different this time because I knew I had the confidence of Carlos and I knew that, hey, I kind of know what I'm doing at this point, right? So it wasn't as bad, but you just kind of go into it. And for me personally, that's always been the best motivator is the kind of the fear of failure. And like, you don't want to suck ever. And I think that's super important to me that I do well in my craft. And I remember, joining MongoDB with obviously a lot of excitement, but also a lot of trepidation too, because now this was like full on my kit and caboodle. It wasn't like flying the plane. It was actually, building it. Right. And kind of building it while it's sort of flying too, because it was a really interesting time when I joined.
Yeah, the company was in transition at that point, right? Towards a different offering.
Yeah, different offering. Dave had just joined a few months back. Carlos obviously joined the December before, starting to figure out how to do direct sales and do it right into the enterprise segment, and how to ultimately just evolve monetizing an open source database, right? So I remember, I think revenue at the time was probably like 25 million. Which, stark difference from where it is today, right? I'm sure, the public company and you see where they are, it's like 600 million, I think, run rate. Yep. But it was a very small team. And obviously Carlos was chartered to build out that entire go-to-market function. They ultimately hired a new CMO right after Megan, who I actually worked for a little bit. But yeah, it was exciting, right? Because it was kind of the first opportunity for me to do something clean slate and do it in a way that it was gonna be mine, Patrick, if that makes sense. It was my baby to kind of make sure I do enough care and feeding and make sure they're growing. Versus again just figuring out how to like sometimes it felt like just operating versus like building completely. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting. How did you go about that then? How did you do that differently? Was it a specific playbook you created or?
Yeah, good question. So I ended up, there were, I think about 12 people that I inherited on the team. I think we started out with 6, right? Because some of them self-selected out, others ended up saying, hey, I want to do this. I'm not sure. And we kind of made the decision jointly saying like, hey, this is probably not the right path for you based on like what it is you want to do and what we're looking for. So I ended up with a core team of like 6 or 7. And then we had bench in EMEA to actually have, a leader that was promoted. And his name's, actually, we had a leader that was kind of running the ship for a while. That was actually, his name's Joe. And then in Americas, I ended up hiring externally. So I brought in, obviously some trusted individuals on my side. So like John Hong, I brought in to help me run, some of the functions. So, net, I think recruiting was one of the key things. What I changed on the recruiting playbook was really honing in on kind of the profile. So we were looking for the non-negotiables, right? Here are the baseline things that we want to see in terms of characteristics. That actually didn't change much in terms of, high drive, high intellectual curiosity, and high capacity, and kind of that horsepower to run. And obviously the demonstrated domain expertise. But I think where we really nuanced it too was I wanted to look for people who had actually upside, because we knew we were going to scale and grow very quickly. And upside, not as great individuals, but like figuring out how we can plan ahead for succession, meaning almost look at people who we could hire in that had the path to get to leadership, to be that first line. Because I mean, we had no one, right? If you think about it. And making sure I had made that first external hire with a key person I trusted, but then also look to build kind of the first wave of leaders was critical. So like that was one nuance. I think the other thing too was making sure that we really understood what was needed, because it's a database and it's open source. And we end up with kind of a slightly different target. We were still trying to sell to IT, but what we really should have been doing even back early then was probably selling more to developers in addition to IT. And we weren't doing that enough. So I had kind of gravitated towards hiring people with kind of that IT ops kind of sysadmin background, more so than people who actually knew a lot of, programming languages or had a developer background. So we quickly made that adjustment once we figured that out too. But that's my point, right? Even though you come in with a playbook, you've got to iterate on it and then take the learnings, saying like, hey, crap, this is not working. We just churned out a bunch of SEs because, hey, this is just not what we need to like drive this sale. Yeah. And that happened over the course of time, because as much as we went from like 6 to just about 100 SEs globally in 3 years, we probably churned out, maybe, I don't know, 30 or so, which, looking back, maybe not horrible numbers, but, to me personally as a leader, right, it was always hard to acknowledge that, hey, I made a bad hire, or we made a mistake, or this person's not working out. So it was always hard for me just on a personal level to see people, have to be let go or to quit or, to kind of self-select out in that regard. So definitely changed that. And then I think the biggest change was honestly just figuring out the sales process and the methodology with, Carlos, with JP Bolin, with some great leaders I met, like John Siebert, who obviously wasn't from BladeLogic, but he's over at, I think, New Relic now. But just honestly figuring out how we want to change the sales process that we were all kind of grown up and used to, and adapt it to the fact that, it's open source. You can download it in a minute and basically have it run, and people don't even need to talk to anyone, right? And how do you then monetize something that people can use for free? So really ferreting that out took, I think, quite a bit of time to kind of craft and hone. So yeah, I would call those two things out as kind of the two big things.
Fantastic.
So then you became the VP of Global Strategy, Product Marketing and Developer Relations in March 2018. That's quite a mouthful. So what additional responsibilities did you just take on in that promotion?
Yeah, so I was working obviously in the pre-sales role for about 3 years. And then it was actually, I remember this conversation too. Yeah, I guess I remember all the pivotal conversations with kind of career changes. So I was in an airport in Richmond. Had just come out of a meeting with Capital One, with Dave and with Elliot, CEO and CTO respectively. And they just kind of asked me point blank, like, hey, how do you think our product marketing function's going? I gave them my opinion, and they kind of said like, hey, we think you'd be a good fit. Do you want to like find out some more about it? At first I was like, no effing way. Like, why would you want me to do that? That's not my background. But I think the flight ended up being delayed. I ended up sitting there with Elliot for just about an hour. And I think the two things that really struck me were the fact that I'd get to work obviously very closely with him. I get to learn something, because it was obviously they were looking for someone who had some of the product background and knowledge. So I'd be learning everything on kind of the marketing side of the house, working for Megan Eisenberg. And then the developer relations thing ended up being something that was obviously very new to me, but something that was absolutely intriguing, right? Because it was all around community building awareness, building, kind of this outreach in a way that was not meant to be selling anything at all, right? You just kind of help developers do their job differently and in a better way. And just kind of building that piece out was intriguing, right? So that was kind of the catalyst for that. So ended up very happily leaving, I think, the SA organization, because I was very confident in obviously the leadership and, the succession, right? Because we had some great individuals that were promoted into roles like, Mark Yolenti, Arthur Vigers. They've all, Mark is still there now running Americas. Arthur ended up running EMEA for me. And then he left to go to a company called Pivotal, left there and just joined Segment. And obviously they just got acquired by Twilio. So he's, done really well for himself, and he's just fantastic. But I felt good thinking, hey, this is going to be a good time to leave the team kind of at a high, and then kind of, take a little bit of a step into doing something different. Mm-hmm. So that was the impetus at the time, right? And kind of the motivation.
Right. And now coming to the present day, you're currently at ThoughtSpot. So you're currently SVP of Customer Success and Field Engineering as of November last year. Obviously, Brian McCarthy is there, and I know you've obviously had quite a significant amount of funding. So yeah, it's obviously going very, very well for you right now. Tell us a little bit about your mission and a little bit about your role at present.
Yeah. So the thing that really appealed to me about ThoughtSpot was the fact that I would have an opportunity to own the customer journey end to end. So everything except sales. So if you're thinking about pre-sales, if you think about professional services and delivery, customer success and business value consulting, all the ingredients that I knew over the course of the last, 10, 15 years are needed in order to land and sell customers, right? Because remember, we're finding out their pain. Let's find a pain worth solving. Let's prove that the pain is there, show how we can help, capture the metrics and here are the positive business outcomes we want to kind of get to, but then make it a reality. Because we sell this pipe dream oftentimes, and like going from that initial to ultimately having some realized value and some evidence of value is still so poorly done. So this was a great way for me to just come in and kind of try and own this thing end to end. Work with some fantastic sales leaders, right? So like Brian McCarthy, I hadn't known, had heard quite a bit about him. And JP Bolin, who ended up, I worked several companies with him. He now runs the Americas over at ThoughtSpot. He had kind of made the introduction saying like, Seong, hey, we're looking for this customer success role. Same thing. What do you think? I remember this conversation too. I was down in Kiowa in August, and he had kind of called me saying this. So we ended up kind of enticing me to join ThoughtSpot. And, the company's mission is great, right? Because if you think about data as a whole, right, having spent some time at MongoDB, born out of obviously an operational, transactional database, but obviously, starting to get into more of the analytics, real-time, near real-time analytics. As I was leaving, ThoughtSpot was trying to make, a Google-like experience for anyone who wanted to get insight on their data. So think about obviously analytics, to the nth degree, and making it super simple, not necessarily to people that have a technology background, but any user at all, right? So if you think about the mission of the company, it was actually pretty exciting to know that this was going to be very cutting edge. End up having a ton of marquee, big customer names like Walmart and Nike and others that, again, ended up validating that obviously the tech is something that is solving a very big pain. And for me, again, to kind of build a program out, right, and kind of design this, to your question earlier, Patrick, like, hey, what elements of the playbook have I changed? Mm-hmm. And this is really what it comes down to, is like really figuring out how I can now own this end to end, and really refine and kind of evolve, I think, even some of the preconceived notions of some of the functions. So like take customer success, for example. I think in kind of its most base, maybe almost like perspective, It's someone who's like emailing or calling a customer to say like, hey, are you okay? Do you have what you need? I can help you with these things. Versus I'm trying to flip it on its head a little bit. I actually recruited some of the folks on the team because they're coming from pre-sales backgrounds.
Yeah.
So if you look at the hires I've made, so like, well, I'll talk about one of the promotions, right? So Angela Hooper, she was running a pre-sales team at ThoughtSpot. She runs my customer success team for the Americas. She's a pre-sales person, professional, right? And she was the best fit, I think, because she brings so much of what it is we're trying to do with customer success to the table, having the breadth, the depth, true understanding of the customer pain, but also the ability to interact with customers and solve those things and help them through those first initial obstacles, friction points, having that, the right answer at the right time, and having that kind of mindset around everything I mentioned earlier. Jim O'Donnell, runs pre-sales formerly at AppDynamics. He's now running pre-sales here he's running customer success here at ThoughtSpot. Miriam Graff, she came from Burst running pre-sales. She runs customer success, et cetera. And, I think what we're trying to do is really have kind of the breadth and depth around the domain and the ability to have like kind of cut your teeth in pre-sales. But if you look at Scott Metcalf, who runs, one of the customer success teams as well, he comes from a pre-sales background, but also was doing sales. So like we're trying all sorts of things because ultimately we want to make sure we can kind of live true to the promise of what we've sold a customer to what they can ultimately realize. Because, if we talk about champions, they will fight for us and sell for us when we're not there. It's our duty and obligation to give them the evidence of the return on their, investment, right? On what they've championed us for. So I feel like this was a great opportunity for me to be able to, again, kind of craft this and own it end to end.
That's really interesting. A discipline we see as growing really quickly currently, although it's been around for a while. I don't know your thoughts on how it's evolving is value engineering, Seong, and how closely that kind of aligns to MEDDIC methodology and playbook organizations, because it's all about the creation of and discovery of pain, right?
Yeah, it's definitely the creation and discovery of pain and quantifying it, right? So that helps. And honestly, any software company that's not doing it is probably doing themselves a disservice, right? Because if you think about value framework, what are we really capturing? Future state, positive business outcomes, right? So there's some number behind the pain. So value engineering, business value consulting ultimately helps significantly in that arena to be able to capture it, identify it, but more importantly, build a solid business case and potentially an ROI model, depending on what it is you're selling and who you're selling to. So that's step one, though, isn't it? Right? Because you can land it and say, hey, we're going to solve all these things and here's what we're proposing. But this is where I think the beauty of what we're trying to do at ThoughtSpot really comes into play is now how do we then take that and find and capture the value realized? Because it's always hard to, I think, have those details kind of ferreted out and uncovered. So I think for us, the business value consulting function also captures the business value realized. I know you can do it at a very high level with a proof point or a win story or a case study, but I'm thinking about it more as how we can arm and give back to our champions, as I said earlier, really around here's the evidence of value, because every champion has their own personal win of some kind. So again, it's our obligation and duty to give them that win and give them evidence of that win, but also capturing that evidence of value just really ensures obviously the higher likelihood that the customer is going to renew, right? There's not going to be any churn, because if they're ultimately getting value, and I always posit this, value is binary. It's you either get value or you don't. And, we don't want to be not providing value. So I think this is where business value consulting and value engineering has a huge role in terms of, really ensuring not just that land, but ultimately, the net retention, right, of that customer. Because I think in a cloud and SaaS world, that's probably one of the most important things you need to really focus on is providing value back and evidence of having solved that pain that you've identified in the first place.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And do you think the market conditions and the move towards the license-based model has driven a lot of that?
Yeah, for sure, right? Because but at the end of the day, it's always about justifying the purchase, right? And at MongoDB, we ended up doing a lot of CFO ready business cases, because as we sold more and more and sold higher, and as more enterprise customers ended up having much larger deployments of MongoDB, we ended up having to, again, have a more encompassing ROI and a CFO-ready business case, right? Which was born out of some of the things we learned and kind of crafted at BMC. And same thing for ThoughtSpot. David Copey, who's my director of business value consulting in the Americas, he'll do work that's lightweight to build just kind of TCO calculators. But then he'll also spend quite a bit of time dealing with big enterprise accounts to really ferret out, here are the multiple use cases, here are the things that we're potentially trying to move the needle on, for two reasons. Let's kind of optimize their journey with ThoughtSpot. Here's the most logical set of use cases we should hit first to have the biggest business impact and kind of the level of effort. And then here are the things that we might want to do medium long term. So you help them kind of create that map, right? That success journey. But then more importantly, like I said, 3, 6, 9 months later, we want to capture those stories, right? And it's not just a business value consultant, but that's something that is inherently part of what we do in customer success, is to, identify and capture those benefits.
Wow. Amazing. And to ask a much broader question, for more junior people watching this, junior pre-sales engineers or individual contributor SEs with a similar drive and aspiration to scale their career, what are the key things you would advise those individuals to be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Yeah. Oh, it's a great question. So here's the thing. With the advent of the interweb, right, the internet, information superhighway, whatever you want to call it, it's so increasingly easy to reach out to people, period. Right. So I think the way that, so I mean, here's kind of a personal example of it. So my oldest son, he's 15. He's thinking about a baseball career, obviously plays a ton of baseball. And he's kind of at the point now as a freshman in high school where he's thinking about recruiting for colleges, right? So he's created an Instagram account, created a Twitter account. You guys should follow him, by the way. I'll send you the details. But he does this to kind of self-promote, but also to reach out and kind of get exposure to college coaches, right? Yeah. Because he just wants to kind of build a little bit of an awareness. I think if you take that same mantra that, Matt's taking, and my other son, Tim's probably going to be right behind, is, reach out, identify some key people that, you think you may want to connect with or may get some advice from, or may just be good to know to network. Because I hate the LinkedIn generic invite saying like, hey, I want to connect with you. Personalize it a little bit, saying like, hey, really interested in maybe connecting to learn more about this, or maybe just to get connected because of X or Y. Those get my eyeballs, and I will respond typically and say like, hey, would love to just even connect, 15-minute conversation. We can do it over Zoom. So I feel like anyone that's junior and kind of starting out in their career, dedicate the time every week to figure out, hey, who would be, some great people to kind of connect with, and try, because I think it's just become so easy. So that's one. I think the second thing too is, if it is pre-sales is the career that is so well hidden. Like you don't know about this until you kind of know about it. Yeah. And I do think that there's, if anyone's listening and ultimately kind of taking this to heart, if you care about technology, if you care about solving business problems and want to have something new that you're dealing with, because, my pre-sales leader at ThoughtSpot, who runs Americas, his name's Kendrick Heath. He said something to me a few weeks ago that, really just kind of crystallized something, which is pre-sales is a lifestyle. Like it's a lifestyle. Think about it, right? It ebbs and flows. It's not a 9-to-5 job. You have to live it and breathe it. And I do think that, there's something to be said for the technology and the business kind of, marriage that happens. And if that interests you, then like explore it, right? Is the other piece of advice, because there's a lot of it out there, but it's not well defined like a developer or a DBA or a sysadmin or a sales rep. And I do think that it's one of these careers that you end up kind of falling into. So, it's hard to say like, hey, go find this thing when you don't know it exists. But I do think that's why I'm saying just network, right? Because there's so much information out there. Even if you are savvy about LinkedIn, it's just a really good way to kind of get exposure for yourself and just kind of get connected and, kind of work that angle. The other thing too is, just stay kind of on top of technology and trends as much as you can, because I think that's where you might find something that really piques your curiosity and, can be helping to open an opportunity for you.
Right. The perfect segue to the final question, which is what technology or area of innovation do you think is going to have the biggest impact on business in the next decade?
In the next decade, that's a tough one. Like I said, I really suck at thinking about things, in the future and kind of ahead. I will say this, the problem that hasn't been like completely solved is, I think, still the problem around data, right? Having had the experience at MongoDB, having had the experience as a DBA, and now even at ThoughtSpot, I think we all still sell kind of the promise and the dream of being able to like really unlock the power and unlock, the kind of the secret insights and kind of speed to insight and speed to insight and then action in data. But in the reality of it, like data is just being generated, faster and more in higher volume. And I do think that that's still going to be very much the place to be, especially with the advent of cloud, especially with, I think, how some of the players are going to consolidate, right? Especially in kind of the, analytics side of the house. I do think that there's going to be quite a bit of runway there. The other thing that I'll say is kind of interesting to me, and, I have a buddy that works over at Uncork, is kind of this low code, no code kind of movement, right? The idea of like composability and the idea of being able to do things, the last few years have all been about developers, right? Sell to developers, the explosion of developers. And now it's almost like this abstraction layer of like, hey, you don't need to be a hardcore developer, but now you can have this ability to kind of build apps and build things with kind of this low code, no code concept. So I think that might be a really interesting space to kind of look at and see. But beyond that, man, I don't know. I mean, who knows 5 years from now, like what the heck's going to be happening, especially these days.
Well, some very interesting concepts there. So thank you for that. So I suppose this is the point where we then summarize what we've heard today in what's been a really, really great interview. It's obviously been very, very eye-opening. So I suppose I just want to reflect on a few things that I think we've heard today. And I think the very first place to start is understanding your mindset about the importance of the marriage between business and technology. And I think that when we talk about the 33 CXOs and the incredible success that these guys have gone on to achieve, such incredible, mind-boggling, statistically impossible things, it wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have the support of a pre-sales function by their side that was able to translate that relationship and make sense and get that traction between what they're trying to sell, the value, and the business pain. And I think that the reason why, looking at yourself, Seong, and the incredible success that you've gone on to go and have is because of your ability to really be true to that mindset of always having that natural curiosity, which has served you so well from day one to go and really figure things out. But I think also you epitomize a lot of the criteria which has enabled you to always elevate yourself without necessarily having to necessarily ask, because you've always attached yourself to the business value. You've always maintained that relevance, and sales leaders want that next to them because you bring so much value and your sheer dedication and enthusiasm to figure things out, be successful, and it's no surprise to all of us why you find yourself where you do today. So I just want to say a really big thank you for taking the time to speak to us. I speak on behalf of us, the viewers, the listeners. I'm sure they've taken lots and lots from today's session. So thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Simon, thank you. Patrick, thank you. This was so much fun. I appreciate the opportunity immensely.
Yeah, it's been truly fascinating and an absolute pleasure as well. So thank you, Seong.
So to our listeners, I just want to say a big thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please remember to subscribe. There's lots and lots of content available on our blog. So please do check out somuchsoap.com/blog, and please tune in for another session soon. Thank you very much for joining us today.